Hello friends, my name is Dave Peebles. I'm the Director of the Australia Pacific Security College. It is my great honour to introduce this very special series to celebrate the 20th anniversary of RAMSI. RAMSI is a wonderful story of Pacific friends coming together to work alongside Solomon Islanders in one of the best examples of regional security cooperation in the world. It is also a powerful story of the strength and resilience of the Solomon Islands people. Solomon Islands has a special place in the heart of anyone who has had the honour of serving in Solomon Islands. We learn something of ourselves and how to live from the people of the Solomon Islands. So God bless Solomon Islands and the peoples of the Pacific. Thank you, and I very much hope you enjoy this special series.
Welcome to the Pacific Wayfinder. This is a special series celebrating the 20th anniversary of RAMSI, the Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands, celebrating our region united. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Solomon Islands descended into civil conflict in a period known as the tensions. The Solomon Islands government asked its Pacific family for help. The Pacific answered the call. The Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands, RAMSI, arrived in peace on July 24, 2003, and departed in friendship on June 30, 2017. Thousands of police, military, and civilian personnel drawn from across the Pacific. 15 contributing countries. 14 years. 7 RAMSI special coordinators. One very special place. Solomon Islands. I'm Aka Rimon, your host, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Dr. Henry Ivarature and Professor Dave Peebles. Maori Henry, Maori Dave.
Thanks, Aka.
Oh, hello, friends and One Talks. Dave, you spent a long time in Solomon Islands. What do you love about that country?
So much, Henry, so much. So thank you, Henry, and thank you, Aka. I was really fortunate. I was able to live in Solomon Islands for 4 years. And when we arrived in Solomon Islands, my children were 5 years old and 3 years old. And I always said there was nowhere else in the world that I would have liked to have raised my children over that period of their lives. It's just such a wonderful country. There was just such a great sense of community, a really strong sense of community, and a really strong sense of everyone caring for everyone else. So it was really wonderful. And this series is really my love letter to Solomon Islands and a way of saying thank you for the time my family and I had there.
But then, Dave, you also returned recently to Solomon Islands. How did that make you feel?
Oh, I was so happy to be back, Aka. Like, it was just so special, and a lot of the people that I had worked with were still there, so I was able to say hello to them. I did some shopping. I went to DJ Graphics and got some new Solomon shirts because I've grown a little bit since I was last there. And a very dear family friend of mine gave me and my wife some shell money, which I'm proud and pleased to be wearing today. Henry always makes me work hard, so I did do some interviews when I was there as well. And our first interview today is with the Deputy Commissioner Operations of the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force, Juanita Matanga, and I think you'll really enjoy hearing her story today.
During the tension period, there were a lot of anarchy in this country. There was no law and order. The governance system is not functional. There was no, it wasn't like a country. You know, it's people are run here and there. People were not able to live in a peaceful way. Everyone's sort of very scared at the, a different situation that they face with, which involved tragedies and, so a lot of things were not in order. And I will summarize it by saying that this whole place was living in anarchy. During RAMSI period here in the Solomon Islands, a lot of good things, professionally and personally, I have experienced working alongside colleagues from the police and also from the RAMSI as a whole. A lot of good work that they've been put in place, in particular restoring law and order, the governance system, working towards improving the economy of the country, improving business sectors. So they have done a lot of good work in terms of rebuilding the whole country, apart from restoring law and order. It's a new birth for a country. The mission in itself has a major impact because of the contributions that Pacific Islands participated in the mission. As you know, the Solomon Islands is a Pacific island, but also has some connections in terms of culture, the customs and values and the way they think and do things, but in a Pacific way. So when the Pacific Islands form part of the mission, they've contributed in a way that some of the things that they have undertook are quite difficult to explain because it's more understanding naturally. So they have contributed in a way that helped the mission to succeed in the way they understand the people here. Because as you know, Solomon Islands is a diverse country made out of different peoples. People come from different cultures. So it's quite a very interesting mission. It has a lot of interesting observations with the people that I work with. I work with different officers from different Pacific Islands. There are a lot of commonalities I have observed, the way we do policing, how they interact, how they relate to the local people. So that's what I have seen during those times when they came in as part of the mission. I think the mission in itself has a very unique and niche approach to a situation that never been approached in that context. But having observed the way the mission was conducted in this country, they put a lot of good work in place for the country to take it through. But it's up to the country to build on those work that RAMSI had put in place for the country. If they wanted to go backwards, it's up to the country's leadership of the country to do that. But I would be very sad to see all the hard work that RAMSI put in place for the 20 years that they've been in country to try and rebuild this country. It's something that we Solomon Islanders should be proud of and should continue to build on those momentum that they have done for us. And I think that's what I would like to appreciate the countries, the leaders of those countries who have put together their personnel and sent them over to this country to help them. And that really reflect on the theme, the heading of the RAMSI is Helpem Friend. That word really reflected of the multi-organizations that came together and help another country to build up during times that they were not able to stand as a country.
She was really great.
I think the Deputy Commissioner is one of the most impressive Pacific leaders. I just really admire her. I think she's a very powerful public presence, and it's just great to see that servant leadership in action, and she's been the Acting Police Commissioner at times as well. So I feel really honoured that she was able to join us for this series and was our first Solomon Islands guest.
So it's easy to look back on RAMSI now as a great example of regional security cooperation and commitment. But someone had to come up with that model. And to go back to 2002 and 2003, the model wasn't obvious. And the commitment of Australia and other countries to a different approach wasn't obvious either. Professor Yu White joins us today.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Professor, in 2002, you were the director of a new think tank, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. What was on your mind when you first started thinking about Solomon Islands and this report?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. And as you mentioned in your introduction, the report, Our Failing Neighbour, produced by ASPI, was very much Ellie Wainwright's work, and she deserves a great deal of credit for whatever successes we had. Look, my own thinking about this had begun back in the 1990s when I was working in government. The first Fiji coup in 1987, disturbances in Vanuatu in 1988, the beginnings of the Bougainville crisis in 1989, had, if you like, begun to educate officials in Canberra, including me, to the kinds of challenges that our Pacific Island neighbours were facing. And it also begun in our education, if you like, the importance of working with the region, of dialogue with the region, of becoming more familiar with the region, because I think it'd be fair to say that Australia, including Australian officials, although very actively engaged in development aid aspects, for example, had tended to be a bit hands-off in the Southwest Pacific. And so, in a sense, part of, for me, the background to what became the ASPI report on Solomon Islands was that long process of education that began really in 1987. The more specific stimulus had been the crisis in Solomon Islands in 2000, in about June 2000, I think, when the unrest on Guadalcanal, and particularly in Honiara, but also down on the weather coast, had reached a fairly critical point. There was a moment then, I think it was in June, in which the then Prime Minister, Ulufa'alu, asked Australia to send police because he feared a coup, correctly feared a coup. I think the coup actually happened a few weeks later, and we refused. And I was part of that decision-making process as an official, and I had a conversation with my old friend and former colleague as a journalist, Mary Louise O'Callaghan, who was then a famous figure, of course, and she was then living in the Solomons. And she said, really almost in exactly these words, what the hell have you done turning down this request? And she said, there's a really serious crisis here and we really need some support. And I said, well, look, I understand that, Mary Louise, but it's really not our policy paradigm. And she said, if you'll forgive the English, we'll change the bloody paradigm. It's not working. And slammed down the phone. And I can honestly say that at that point I thought, she might be right. But I did think to myself, when I got to ASPI as the first director, I thought, here's one of the number one issues we should focus on. And of course, in the intervening years, until 2000, when Ellie started working on the paper, in the intervening years, the situation in the Solomon Islands had disintegrated further. Situation looked quite critical, and so I suggested to Ellie that we should start doing some work on this.
I think one of the interesting aspects of this report is that it wasn't just an ivory tower exercise. You worked very closely with Solomon Islanders. Could you tell us about that process?
Part of the change of paradigm was that Australia had to move away from the kind of hands-off, might even say benign neglect approach which had characterised Australia's relations in the post-colonial era in the Southwest Pacific, towards a more active, engaged commitment. But it was terribly important to us that couldn't work and it couldn't happen if we didn't do that in a way which was absolutely in partnership with our South Pacific neighbours. And we were terribly conscious, Ellie and I were terribly conscious, that in producing the report that Ellie produced, in making the proposals we were making for an intervention on the scale that RAMSI eventually became, and that is, we were really recommending in the report an intervention on that scale. In other words, we thought it would be both wrong in principle, but also ineffective as a policy practice for us to think about that, to talk about that, without developing our ideas very closely with figures in the Solomon Islands itself, and without seeking both their input and their approval and their support and their engagement. I mean, it just wasn't going to make any sense at all if this was just something that could have came rocketing out of Canberra. And we were very lucky that we found in a range of interlocutors, as you say, Milner Tazaki here in Canberra was a very important interlocutor. We were very fortunate that both the Governor-General and the Speaker, Sir Peter Candelaria, took an active part, and we were really glad that we got them, that they agreed, very willingly agreed, not just to consult with us as we undertook this process, but also to write in their own words. We wanted to have their own words in there. We wanted our readers to hear from them. And the perspectives they provided added a great deal to both to the substance of the report and also to the credibility of the report. We always knew this could not succeed if it was just a Canberra story or an Australian story. It had to be very much a regional cooperative effort.
As part of your consultations, you supported and encouraged Sir Alan Kemakeza, Solomon Islands Prime Minister, to write to the Australian Prime Minister, John Howard, and that was really the letter that kicked off the formalities of creating RAMSI. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that.
It seemed to us that the only way, certainly the best way, but probably the only way in which an Australian government could pick up the kind of report that we'd produced, the kind of ideas we'd produced, and make that Australian policy, and then carry that forward to make that a regional initiative. The only way that could happen was if there was a request from the Solomon Islands government, itself. We worked quite closely with the High Commissioner, then High Commissioner, Solomon Islands High Commissioner in Australia. We provided him with drafts. We were responsive to the kinds of thoughts that he had. I can't remember whether we suggested it or whether he suggested it, but the idea emerged that if he could approach his Prime Minister, ask his Prime Minister, suggest to his Prime Minister that he would write to our Prime Minister, that would be a good way of turning our idea into Australian policy and turning Australian policy into a viable, operable, regional enterprise. Sometimes plans work.
So the report was very clear that any mission should be multilateral, as you said earlier, and it contemplated an important role for the Pacific Islands Forum. But tell me, why did you regard a multilateral mission and the Pacific Islands Forum involvement as important?
There's a kind of an internal and an external element to that. Internally, there was a great deal of sensitivity in Australia, in Canberra policy circles, to the idea that Australia would be drawn back into some kind of neo-colonialist role in the South Pacific. We didn't want that. We knew that nobody in the South Pacific wanted that, and there was a real concern that this couldn't be an Australian initiative. We could provide some leadership, we could provide some resources, we could provide some coordination, but it couldn't be ours. And of course, when we thought, well, who could it be? It was natural that this would be a South Pacific story, that this should be something the South Pacific did. And so both in terms of making the idea saleable in Canberra, which was not a trivial process, I might say. We were battling against the accepted orthodoxy, that established paradigm that Mary Louise reprimanded me about. And it was, we were by no means sure we were going to win it, but we also just thought it wouldn't fly in Canberra, and it wouldn't fly in the region, and therefore it wouldn't fly in Honiara if it wasn't very much a regional enterprise. And of course, the good news was that we had in the forum, a well-developed, well-respected, well-functioning regional forum, framework, institution, which provided, kind of just exactly the kind of institution you needed to carry it forward. So that seemed a bit of a no-brainer.
And I guess the Bikatawa Declaration at that time,
yes.
Where did it fit in this whole arrangement?
We were very much arguing against an established policy paradigm in Canberra. but we also felt we were kind of swimming with the tide in terms of the way in which the region itself was thinking about these issues, and we're very much reflected in Bitakawa. A number of conversations that we'd had around the region, informal conversations I've been involved in as an official over preceding years, that it gave us the sense that this was the kind of initiative that the region was willing to look at, as long as it was sensibly framed, as long as it was clearly responsive to and sensitive to concerns in Honiara itself, and as long as it really engaged with wider regional values, really. I mean, it had to be a kind of a, Pacific kind of thing. Yep. And we did feel that we were kind of, in that respect, we were not exactly pushing on an open door, because, we still had to get it right. But there was an opportunity there.
Just that would nudge the door open.
Yeah, that's right. Just give it a nudge with our elbow,
Yeah. Well, RAMSI ultimately ran for 14 years, rather than the 10 years as the report recommended.
Yes, that's right.
So it involved thousands of personnel from across the Pacific, and left Solomon Islands in friendship and peace. How do you personally feel when you see your policy work play out like that?
It was unusual for a policy idea developed outside government to be picked up so comprehensively and implemented. We were very pleased. I think the challenge that we recognised then was that a big long-term initiative like that needs a lot of sustained attention. As you mentioned, we predicted that it was going to take 10 years. And I remember when we first suggested that to colleagues around Canberra, they sort of, 10 years, no government's ever going to commit to 10 years. And to which I said, well, look, I think we have it in the report. There was phase one, which was to stabilise the immediate security problem in Honiara, elsewhere around Guadalcanal, the very difficult situation down on the weather coast. And the tendency for Australian engagement in these sorts of issues in the preceding, really going back to 1987, had been to sort of try and go in there, fix the security problem, and then get out. And our whole point was, no. This is only going to work if you're prepared to take a long-term approach to trying to address some of the deeper issues. The best thing to do is to ask the Solomon Islanders. Don't ask me. But I think so, yes. And is that pleasing? Yes, because, we have worked in government. Most of the time, things in government sort of work and sort of don't.
The future of the country is very important. So though my life and that of the life of my family are at risk, and if I could achieve during my time of leadership by calling RAMSI to come to help us out, is the right thing to do. I feel I achieved something.
It was a very broadly based mission. Obviously New Zealand made a big contribution, but you had Fiji and you had Papua New Guinea, you had Vanuatu and so on. So there was quite a broadly based effort.
Australia said, we're going to come and help you, we're not going to come alone, which was the right thing to do because they were smart. They didn't want to get burnt. They made sure that the rest of the region was standing in with them.
Our next special guest is Nick Warner, who was the first RAMSI Special Coordinator responsible for setting up the mission. Nick has had any number of important positions in his career, including being the Australian High Commissioner to my home country of Papua New Guinea. He has a great love for the Pacific, which continues to this day. And Dave and our colleague Liam recently met with Nick in Melbourne.
So the preparations were pretty intense, as they needed to be, as they should have been. And you need to remember, I came in pretty late. So we deployed on the 24th of July. I can't quite remember when I got the call from the Secretary of DFAT, Ashton Calvert. We came very well prepared, as I think I said, with plans of action for the first day, the first week, really the first month or two. And obviously the further in time we went forward, the more we had to refine those. But right at the beginning, and this goes back to how well this operation was planned, and it goes back to winning the support of Solomon Islanders. We knew that life had to not only look different with our arrival, but had to be different for Solomon Islanders from day one, from the first ADF soldier who got off the first C-130 that morning on 24 July. So what the planning had included was, I mentioned the Manura before, sitting in Iron Bottom Sound, a very big visual indication of life is different. But on the ground, and this is Ben McDevitt's planning, not mine, close personal protection from the moment we arrive for the Prime Minister. Joint patrols with the Royal Solomon Islands Police in the markets of Honiara from the day we arrived. Protective elements of our police and military and the Solomon Islands Police at critical buildings around Solomon Islands, around Honiara. So those things brought home to Solomon Islands immediately that things were different. These people mean business. These people have started to do good things, things that are helpful to us, things that are restoring peace and law and order from day one. Really important visually, but actually really important practically. And it went to with some of those other things I talked about, talking truth, the program, getting around the country. Just allowed Solomon Islanders to realise we were their friends and we were there to help them.
Nick, take us back to 20 years ago, 24 July 2003, the day that RAMSI deployed. What were your feelings on that first day?
I think there was a feeling of excitement, there was a feeling of anticipation. We had done the hard work, we'd done the planning, we were as well informed about the situation, I think, as we possibly could, but we didn't know how we're going to be received when we landed. A couple of, or maybe several C-130s had landed before me and the leadership team, and the reception had been really good at Henderson Airfield. I want to say thousands of people, but certainly a lot of people, kids, a feeling of excitement.
Police and military personnel from across the Pacific were a critical component of even the early days of RAMSI. Can you tell us how important having that Pacific representation is?
I think vitally important. Having that Pacific feel and look and character to RAMSI was vital. What it gave us was the ability to work, liaise, communicate with and understand what was happening amongst the broad population of the Solomon Islands much better than we would have if it had just been Australians, or Australians and New Zealanders. And we deployed those police and those military right out into many of the islands and provinces of Solomon Islands. Gave us a real hands-on, fingertip feel of what was happening out there. It also had the imprimatur of the Pacific Islands Forum, and that too was really important. As the months went on in my part of the deployment, the first year or so, and then as the next 14 years rolled on, as we came to obstacles, as we came to problems, as we came to issues that needed tough decisions to be made in resolution, having the Pacific Islands Forum, all those contributing countries as part of our organisation made a huge difference.
One of the early priorities for the RAMSI mission was dramatically reducing the number of weapons in the community through a
Yeah.
gun amnesty process. Just wondered if you could talk us through that and the process of weapons disposal.
To begin with, law and order was our primary objective and responsibility. And to get a situation which had been somewhat anarchic and chaotic back into a regular, orderly and law-abiding situation meant taking weapons, guns, out of society. Not only out of society, disarming the police, disarming the militia groups. So that was vitally important. It started almost on day one. Certainly the planning started on day one. And it was only in August, so we deployed in July. In August, we had a 3-week amnesty program. I think over that period of time, we collected almost 3,500 weapons, and of those, maybe something less than 500 were high-powered military-style weapons. So we did this by communicating with the public, by getting the message out, by talking to the militant groups, by disarming the police force, and then very importantly, and this is all about trying to demonstrate that RAMSI was in Solomon Islands to help the people of Solomon Islands to restore law and order. We did that in a very public way. I think it was maybe in the after we'd been there for a week, the last day of July, we had the first ceremony where we cut up in public weapons that had just been handed in, sometimes in front of the people who had handed them in. So the weapons were all destroyed immediately, they were destroyed publicly, and then they were buried. So by the time that first year was over, we had not rid the country of weapons. We knew there were still weapons in the hands of some of the militants, but we had removed the vast bulk of them, and we had very deliberately and decisively shown Solomon Islanders that we could.
How important, Nick, was the arrest of the notorious militant leader Harold Keke? And can you tell us a little bit about how that process played out?
Yeah, well, to start with, it was fundamentally important, really, to the success of that first year of RAMSI and arguably to the successive years of RAMSI. So Harold Keke had been rampaging through the Weather Coast for a number of years. There'd been a large number of savage killings, raids on villages. He was sadistic, he was paranoid. He probably had with him 60 or 70 militants and quite a large number of high-powered military weapons. Ben McDevitt, who was the head of the police contingent and a terrific guy, had written to Keke through intermediaries in Honiara, suggesting or saying we were coming and suggesting that he should meet with us and he should hand himself in. And those letters continued in the days, week or so, after we got to Honiara. Keke agreed to meet us, and we had a number of meetings with him. The first one was aborted. We had the manure off the Weather Coast. We deployed a small team to his village, Mbiti. He sat up in the hills and watched us, just being cautious, not sure what to expect. Who were these people? Could they be trusted, I think. Then the next day, I think it was the next day, he did agree to meet us. So Ben McDevitt, John Fruin and I and others came off the Manura, landed at Beatty by helicopter, and sat in a little wooden church with Keke and a number of his henchmen. He was paranoid and he was sadistic, but he was also deeply religious. So church was his choosing, and he said to us later, sitting in a church, he didn't think he could lie to us. I talked to him, Ben talked to him. We were very straight and direct, as we were with everyone in Solomon Islands, all the other militant groups, but also the people of Solomon Islands. We were not there to negotiate. We were not there to do deals. So Ben said to him that there was an arrest warrant for him for crimes that he'd committed maybe 10 years before. And we needed him to surrender, to give up the weapons that his Guadalcanal Liberation Force had in their possession, and we needed a number of his lieutenants to also surrender to us as well. He came back to us soon after that, agreeing to surrender himself and to be arrested. So a few days later, I think it was, we landed back at the village. There was a large crowd. There was also a large 50 cal machine gun lying on the beach, which got us a little bit nervous at one stage. But Harold and his family surrendered to us, as did a number of his subordinates. They were flown to the Manura and then back to our headquarters near Honiara, where he was arrested. It was vitally important for a number of reasons. Firstly, if we hadn't been able to convince him to surrender himself to us, then there would have to have been military action to get him and his force to surrender their weapons. You've been to the Weather Coast. It is impossible terrain. It would have been a very difficult military task to get him out. Secondly, in negotiating his release and arresting him so early on in the operation, it demonstrated to Malaitans and the Malaitan militants that RAMSI was not an anti-Malaitan force, and there was a lot of that talk going around when we deployed. So that too helped us enormously with popular will, but also, and this is important, also in convincing the Malaitan militant forces, who had been refusing to hand in their weapons because Keke still had his weapons, that excuse had now fallen away. A very dramatic, vitally important first step for the operation.
Nick, for those that have followed your career, there's any number of remarkable jobs. Where does being the RAMSI Special Coordinator at that time in Solomon Islands sit?
RAMSI was unique, certainly unique for Australia. A very large multinational peacekeeping operation into our neighbour, the Pacific Islands, to help a friend, in need, and was terrifically successful. For me also personally, it helped do something that I'd done before in Papua New Guinea, and that is to build links with Pacific neighbours. Something that has always been important to Australia, was important then and is still vitally important now.
Well, I found that very interesting, just hearing how they went about setting up RAMSI and tackling those critical issues in the early months. Cook Islands was actually one of the members of the Pacific Islands Forum who was in RAMSI from the start. I'm delighted to say we have a representative from Cook Islands today who is also our final guest speaker, and I'd like to introduce Senior Sergeant Rebecca Hosking.
Thank you, Aka, for inviting me representing our people of the Cook Islands.
Rebecca, welcome and kia orana. Could you tell us what was the best thing about RAMSI for you?
The best part about it is working together with the participating police forces, with Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, New Zealand, and also RSIPF.
What are your reflections on working alongside other representatives from Pacific Police Forces to help a friend in need?
My reflection was how I understood policing work and how easy it was to assist them.
Rebecca, can you tell us how did Solomon Islanders respond to you and other Pacific Police when you were visiting their communities?
It touched my heart and it was very emotional how the older generation thanked us, the Pacific region, for coming to assist and to protect them in the Solomon Islands.
What did you take back from your RAMSI experiences when you returned to policing in your country, Cook Islands?
What I took back was how our commander, Sandy Peasley, she showed leadership. So I took back home that morale of being a leader as a female officer, and I established our Women Advisory Network in 2007.
How did you feel as you left Solomon Islands?
The day we were to leave Solomon Islands, my Bravo team from our general policing frontline staff of the RSIPF, they came to say farewell to us at the airport, and they asked us, please come back and help us. And I said to them, I cannot come back because of my pikinini, my children. And they said, bring your pikinini, we'll find you a home. And that touched my heart.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Meitaki, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. It's an honor, again, for inviting me to be part of this interview. Thank you, and kia ora ana.
That's been a great episode full of action and, of course, excitement. We haven't had any romance yet, but we will have that in later episodes.
Romance, Henry.
Indeed,
You're full of
romance.
surprises, Henry.
Is that a guarantee?
I'm sure it will be there in the next episode. So, in the next episode of this special series celebrating the 20th anniversary of RAMSI, we will talk story with the president of the Media Association of Solomon Islands, Gina Kekea, RAMSI Special Coordinator James Bartley, former Pacific Islands Forum Secretary General Tui Loma Neroni Slade. Those will be our next guests that we'll be having talk story with.
Well, thanks, Henry, and thanks, Dave. And thank you to all our viewers and listeners. We'll see you next time on this special 20th anniversary celebration of RAMSI.